Harrick Vin is Chief Technology Officer at Tata Consultancy Services, India's biggest tech firm. Does India stand a chance, first of all, at generative artificial intelligence, let alone becoming a leader, when it hasn't produced anything of note in the sector to date?
So I think if you think about the technology or AI, it's actually going to transform knowledge work, right? So it's not just about the technology, but also its usage and knowledge work. And India is actually, I would say, probably one of the leading countries to actually provider of knowledge work to every organization and everywhere globally in the world.
So I think explain that to the viewer, what knowledge work is.
So knowledge work is anything that sort of, if you think about anything like, if you're in the world of technology, if you think about all your building and maintaining and running, let's say, technology systems. If you think about being a lawyer, that's also knowledge work. If you think about even a journalist, it's a knowledge work because you have to decide. All knowledge work essentially is a combination of what I would call as decisions and actions. Right? So you decide on doing something. So for example, if you're writing a blog, you have to decide what is the topic, what are some of the key messages, how do you actually engage, what is the tonality that you want. And then of course the actions after you have made those decisions is actually to produce a blog, right? So this is true for software engineering, for example. So you sort of think about what kind of software you want to build, how do you want to design it, how do you want to build it, and then you actually go ahead and build, test, deploy, and run, right? So I think we in India, we are sort of actually almost like the knowledge work providers in the world, and AI as a technology is going to fundamentally rethink and redefine knowledge work, right? So on one hand, it is actually going to help improve productivity of people, for sure. But more importantly, it is going to actually make people much better because it's going to help people make better decisions and thereby dramatically improve the quality of output they produce as well as the outcomes that they can deliver, the value that they can deliver. So I think if you think about especially AI, sort of you can think about future of technology sort of one side of the coin and future of work as the other side of the coin. And I think India is actually sort of on one side of that coin. We certainly actually building technology and helping enhance that technology, although a lot of these foundational AI models are certainly coming from the West. Adopting those models and actually delivering value using those technology to help people become better is really where I think India will actually excel.
So are you saying India is going to become more and more reliant on others for AI? Isn't that a dangerous premise?
No, so I think, so there are what I would call is there are foundational models which have to be trained on sort of a lot of data that belongs to the country or sort of sovereign data sets. I think those data sets will actually, and the models will get trained. In India, for example, you have so many different languages. So you have English. So the current models or AI models are more trained on sort of English information available. A lot of the models that we are going to training in India are actually trained on a lot of the local languages because that's really sort of something that is very important. So you will have a plethora of models that will become available in this space. Some will be applicable to certain contexts or certain languages, and some will be applicable to some other context.
A lot of those languages don't exist online at the moment. I mean, Hindi's the world's most spoken language after English and Mandarin, but only has, what, 0.1%
yes.
Presence freely on the internet.
Exactly.
And then these other languages, I mean, if they're not online at all, what happens with inequality?
Well, actually, so what is going to happen is that, first of all, although the content is not online, but it is available in sort of more analog or books form. So that's probably going to become a good source of information that is going to be used for training some of these models. The challenge, of course, the point that you're making is we have to make sure that whenever we train these models, we are actually using the data sort of responsibly. So I think a big challenge is to make sure that we are training these models with the right data as well as we are using the data for the right purposes. And those kinds of guardrails that are needed to actually make sure that you deliver the right value without really compromising your ethics or things of that sort is absolutely critical.
How do you ensure that? How do you ensure good governance, especially when those guardrails aren't even in place globally at the moment?
Yeah, it's a rapidly evolving, I would say, context. In fact, the problem is a little bit more complex than I would say, sort of just ensuring that you actually use the right data and you put right guardrails in terms of what you can use the data for or not, and ethics as well as sort of bias and things of those sorts are actually prevented. There is also a other side of this, which is that once these models actually start getting used, these models actually continuously evolve because they self-learn, right? So a big challenge also is going to be making sure that these models don't start deviating from when they were originally sort of put in place. So the ability, I often call this artificial insanity, right? So you want to make sure that you are actually preventing that. The ability to discover when a model is starting to deviate from what is acceptable in near real time so that you can actually arrest it becoming, basically making a lot of mistakes, if you will, very quickly, is actually a big challenge. So this whole area of what I would call as AI solution assurance is a huge area which I would say today is not very well understood. Right, we need to make sure that we sort of, so while the technology, the basic AI models are actually evolving, we will need to simultaneously evolve this whole technology that will allow us to assure the solutions that are getting built, both at design time with the right use of data and the right guardrails and the right ethics and so on, and also at runtime to make sure that they don't start deviating from the original intent.
So how do you get all of this infrastructure in place? What are the costs, first of all, and how realistic is it for India to do that?
Yeah, so I think, I think obviously right now there are a few providers of the chips and the base technology that is actually, so I think a lot of that technology will have to, right now is, a sovereign infrastructure is actually getting put in place in India and for that matter many other countries, because you want to ensure that the data is residing within the country. There are laws to protect that and so on and so forth. So that is absolutely critical. But access to this infrastructure is going to become more and more important. You're absolutely right. And that is where some of the dependence on the US or the Western countries is very high in terms of the core infrastructure needed.
Mm-hmm. Just looking at your last quarter, there were some 600 active generative AI projects in place. What are the costs involved there and what sort of returns are you looking at?
So I think cost is not right now as big a problem because I think right now the bigger challenge that every organization is facing is to actually start delivering significant value of the technology and more importantly start thinking about scaling that value within an enterprise and for their customers.
So investors are interested, but it's actually getting something out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So the tech part is okay. The value part, we are sort of very early stages as to how do you start realizing value and scale that value. And this realizing and scaling value is not just I would say a technical problem, but it is also an organizational change management problem because the moment you start actually inducing AI into every person's work environment, the role of people changes. Right? The role of person changes from doers of work today to almost a trainer and interrogator of a machine, reviewer of work done by machines, and owners of critical thinking and creativity. Which means, and as machines become more and more intelligent, the role of the people will keep shifting. So this whole problem of adopting this technology, which requires not just reskilling of people, but also continuous adaptation of roles, is a substantial challenge that organizations will have to sort of overcome to truly start scaling the value.
Well, is it the right approach that the Indian state is taking in its 10,000 chip plan? I mean, the state has a poor record of using R&D efficiently and effectively. Putting bureaucrats in charge of working out which projects get the tick, is that the right way?
I think what is going to happen everywhere is that it is going to become very value-centric. So the question is, where is the value? So for example, if you think about a state or a country What is the future of citizen services? What is the future of, let's say, health and wellness? Those are the kinds of questions, right? So how do you ensure that you're able to deliver personalized health to everyone, let's say in India at a remote part of the country, is becoming very, very important. So now using technology or AI to actually augment, for example, a doctor or a nurse that is in a remote area is going to become incredibly important. And those are the things that, so, I mean, I often say that, I mean, while everybody's talking about productivity improvement and sort of job losses and things of that sort, but the real value is going to come from actually augmenting people to make them great by design. So how do you take somebody who is, let's say, a 2-year-old experienced doctor and make that doctor as effective as a 20-year-old experienced doctor? Because you are now imparting a lot of sort of, if you will, collaborative knowledge that has been acquired in a context to that person, so that the person can make much better decisions on the diagnosis and things of that sort.
But is the state in a good position to make those decisions and to set up effective processes as far as the technology goes, and ensuring that AI is a leader for India?
I think the state needs to actually enforce a lot of guardrails with respect to the correct use of data. Goes back to your earlier point about bias and making sure that this is not really sort of haves and have-nots. Sort of ensuring that everybody benefits from this in a sort of equal manner is perhaps where the state's involvement is going to become very, very important.
And to come back to the language challenge, you talked about the books being there. I mean, these languages exist in written form, but what are you saying? Is someone going to have to sit there and read each book into an AI system?
Well, I think, I mean, now, I mean, you can basically, the ability to scan a lot of this material is there. So the technology exists to actually rapidly convert this from an analog form to a digital form, and then leverage a lot of technologies like your optical character recognition and things of that sort to actually then create a corpus that can then be used.
What do you think of Trump's $500 billion private sector investment plan?
I'm sure, I mean, I think it's I would say it's a huge opportunity for the companies in the US, and I'm sure that everyone is probably likely to benefit.
How does it line up with the money being spent in India?
I think it's going to probably also result in additional funding or investments in India. I suppose.
So it could be a good thing.
Yeah, it could be a good thing. But we'll have to just wait and watch. I think it's too early to say.
Mm-hmm. Does India have that private sector involvement? I mean, there are some tech greats in India. First of all, is the will there from the private sector?
To invest into developing? Yes, absolutely. Because
even though the returns aren't there at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, we have to all invest. I mean, every organization in India, and for that matter anywhere else, is really asking the question, what does it take to become future-proof? And investment into some of these most emerging technologies is absolutely going to be critical for that.
But what about the know-how? You talked about knowledge at the beginning of our interview. What about the people with the know-how? A lot of researchers are Indian, top researchers in AI. I think it's some 8% globally. But that 8% is not in India. They're abroad.
Yes.
How do you harness that wealth?
I think there is sort of fair bit of, I would say, sort of knowledge exchange that is happening globally. And that is something that we have always relied on. But I would actually say that it is not just about the knowledge about AI that is important for the future. It is also about the knowledge about functional domains that is important, because I think most of the future discoveries or future growth is going to come from at the boundaries of functions and technology. So for example, if you think about AI-driven medicine or future of drug discovery or AI and materials, right? That is where I think we are probably going to see a substantial opportunity for every organization and every country in the future. So I think even training people into these interdisciplinary areas is going to become incredibly important. So education systems will also need to evolve in order to make sure that we are actually training people on these so that they become experts at the boundaries of these traditional disciplines.
Is that where India needs a lot of help on the education front?
I think every country is likely to be doing this. India is certainly pushing a lot towards building these sort of interdisciplinary education programs.
And tell me a bit more about, you use the example of medicines, of drugs. India is a giant when it comes to generics. What about cutting edge medical technology? What about using AI to find a cure to cancer, something like that? Could India find itself on the front lines of that battle?
I would think so, because given our population is so large, there is a lot of data that is actually just getting collected at hospitals. So, for example, our team is working with some of the cancer hospitals in India to really actually start applying a lot of these AI and Gen AI techniques to actually do early detection biomarkers to be able to predict what is likely to happen, and then of course accelerate the process of drug discovery and so on. I think a lot of different technology, I wouldn't say just one technology AI, but a lot of different technologies are actually likely to come together. So for example, if you think about personalized medicine in the future, you will have a 3D printer that will actually print a medicine that is precisely for me based on, to eliminate all side effects. Now this is not as far-fetched as it sounds. So this is likely to happen.
But would that be accessible to a regular Indian? It sounds expensive.
It probably will start out, but I think the good news about technology is that the cost keeps coming down almost exponentially. So it will start out perhaps a little bit more expensive and rapidly drop.
And what about India accessing all of this data you talk about? India is not China, a completely different political atmosphere. What about privacy and those sorts of issues? Is that something that can hold back India like it does in some countries like Germany, for example, where people are a lot more skeptical about what data is taken from them? I
think that's an incredibly important question, and also something that I think every country is trying to figure out, where exactly do the boundary and where do you sort of draw a line. India is also building a lot of regulations for actually controlling who can do what. So this whole concept of almost, that's something that we have been actually toying with, is this idea of personalized AI, where I actually control the data and I decide on how that is actually used for improving me or helping me become better or whatever, is probably going to take shape. Now, exactly how that gets implemented and what technologies will be, constraints will be put, I think very much early days.
And tell me a bit more about what you think for the short term, first of all, where you see India going when it comes to, say, building chip production capabilities. That's been a big topic around the world. We've seen supply chains come to a halt.
Yeah, I think so. The Tata Group has set up a chip manufacturing capability in India, and it's actually going to come alive in the next year or year and a half. So I think you're going to see more and more of that happen in India.
Mm-hmm. Anything positive for the regular Indian, for the regular global citizen to look forward to when it comes to AI, not just making things easier when it comes to filling out forms, but also perhaps opening new job opportunities?
I think it probably is going to redefine a lot of different jobs. So many new jobs will actually come up. And as I said earlier, I think these jobs at the intersection of traditional fields, which sort of combine AI with something else, are going to become incredibly powerful and important. So I think, the future is certainly bright in terms of the jobs will get redefined, but we believe that many more jobs will get created, not just but the jobs will shift for sure.
Mm-hmm. Any last word of advice that you could leave for those striving to set up their own tech firm or trying to get into the AI business?
I would say probably two things maybe. One is don't just focus on tech, focus on value. So ask the question, which problems are actually really truly worth solving, and if they can be solved using some, and often combination of technologies. And I would say probably for students or people who are sort of learning, I would say become sort of aware of more than one area, because I think most of the future is going to be at the boundaries or the intersection of areas.
Diversification.
Diversification, absolutely.
Harrick Vin from TCS, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a pleasure.